we don't spend enough time reflecting, and holding that space for that reflection and to be willing to go that deep. It is transformational work.
Welcome back, everyone. Today, we are going to be diving into more conversations with our friend Karen and our co-host. And just last time we were just learning a little bit more about her. And we just thought it would be great to go a little bit deeper with that today. And by the way, before we get started, I mean, Scott is, got his Peloton outfit on. So shout out to Peloton. If you want to be a sponsor for us, we would love to, shout out to you more often. So
yeah, I have the philosophy in life. If you should look good, right, before you do something. But here's what's funny is my Peloton's inside my house. So like, I don't even have anybody around, but I do have 9,000 miles on my Peloton.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah. So I do it just
Fleet
about every
riding.
day. Yeah. And I love it. Yeah, I do.
Yeah. Maybe we could try to do a podcast on our Peloton.
Oh, we can.
Oh yeah.
Can you imagine? I actually don't have one yet, but maybe someday.
Mm-hmm.
That would be pretty funny.
Catch my breath.
Yeah, we'd all be doing that, I think.
Yeah.
Karen.
Hi.
How are you?
I am well. Thank you.
Good.
Excited to be here again today with you guys.
Yes. So I think what we would love you to share with the audience and a little bit more about is and you've mentioned this before on our podcasts episodes, you are so passionate about values work. And so maybe just tell us a little bit more about the values work that you do, or the work that you do around values with your clients, and then also maybe some of the impact, that you've seen. And of course, we'll pepper in questions from there.
Okay, cool. Let's see, where do I start? So I may have shared where this all came from, but just having a quick little flashback to the affinity that I noticed that I had. Like I could see that values challenge in someone, and that would be the immediate empowering question. In my early days of coaching, we're taught to use empowering questions. And so I realized that my questions were leaning toward what is that value, or what's being challenged here, or what's, getting to the thing behind the thing, right? It's often times a values challenge. So what I did was put together a little assessment just to play around with, and asked some coaches to come and participate with me. And I tweaked it along the way. You can't hear this lawnmower in my back, can you?
No.
Okay, good.
Sure can.
So we had fun kind of playing in that space to figure out what would make it a powerful assessment. Because it's not so much you identify your words. That's the easy part. It's really going into those words and telling the story about those words, and holding the space for the stories. That's most impactful. So that's really what I honed in on and figured out what are those most important questions to peel back where there's fear. And us as coaches, we listen to that. We listen intuitively to what does that sound like? Is there truth in that? Is there fear in that? And I can't make that judgment, but I can certainly ask, how much fear do you hear here in this story? So that, my client would then be able to recognize that. So instead of me calling that out, and there's all kinds of little anecdotal things along the way that I learned, like certain values are more aspirational. Some may have been acquired through our growing up from our families and our teachers and our coaches. And some may be really, truly rooted in fear. But at the end of the day, when we do this work and peeling all that back, there are the core values that are rooted in truths. And it's a truth for you, but it's also more in line with universal truths that resonate most with you. And so when we can find that, we get what I call the be true statement. And that's how you start to navigate through all of your challenges, all of your decision making. And the more you can lean into that be true statement, that's authenticity, that's effortlessness. And what I've seen as a result of that work is when folks might have been struggling with career changes, really using that as their rubric for how to make decisions on where they would fit in best. When you have some challenges in your life, in your relationships, recognizing truly what is it that's being challenged and why. The process for each one of these value words to peel back on is the same process that we do every day with anything else. Where did this come from? Well, taking time to reflect back and ask, what about that? So what? Because that's what can guide us and help us recognize, discerning where is their fear and how do I get to truth? So the process itself is fairly simple. What is more dynamic is really how the coach shows up for the client, taking them down their own little, holding the space for that journey of ahas and of cathartic, awareness.
Right, because left on our own, right, we can really only go so far, because it's like we don't know what we don't know, or we're not willing to ask ourselves the question that, someone like you, someone like me, right, will ask as coaches. And so that work is so important.
Yeah.
I wonder too, and I'm sure you've seen this, where like they're borrowing values. They might have borrowed them from their family, from their mom, their dad. But what does it look like when someone borrowed them versus like they began to own their own? So they shed some. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, it shows up in the story. So when I would take them through asking some of my series of questions, you'll hear the story. And so in that, the challenge that, a coach then kind of holds that space for would be, well, how much of this is really yours? How is this holding on to this value impacting you? What might it be costing you? The other piece that's interesting is how we might actually have a value word that is our truth, but we are aligned with it from more of a fear-based perspective. And so, for example, communication and connectedness, I may have shared this before, they were my top values, and rightly so. I mean, communication is really important as a coach, and being a mom of 3 girls, you got to figure out how to talk to them.
Well, we probably should, right?
Yeah, it helps. It helps for sure. And connectedness was always this thing that, like I felt a bigger presence than just beyond me, but God, universe, all of that, it's all part of that bigger tapestry that we all fit into, right? And then yet there was this between me and you kind of thing, connectedness also, that I would, we dance between, maybe that duality where we show up as a human and then sometimes we show up more spiritually based. So they for sure are rooted also in some fear, because whenever communication isn't showing up for me mutually, then I feel rejected. And when I feel disconnected from someone and I haven't reached back into my own, interconnectedness to that greater thing, I feel abandoned. And so, of course, it makes sense because, somewhere in that little Karen's, growing up, she had some of those feelings where she wasn't good enough and felt alone. So the more we can build awareness of how that value came to be and that it may have had its challenges all along the way, we can learn how to realign with it from more truth and not let it guide us through that place, like you say, Scott, of, borrowed or fear. Someone else's perfectionistic is one I see a lot. Now, nobody's going to say that I value perfectionism, but their nuances on how they show up, how their personality type, being stickler like, where did that come from? Oftentimes that has been imposed by a parent. So my father's famous words are, better to be thought ignorant than to open up your mouth and leave out all doubt. So if I wasn't showing up knowing what the heck I was talking about, then I might as well just don't participate in the conversation. So that puts a stickler on edge.
Absolutely, right? It's like, of course, I love that you bring that up, because our stories, right? We all have our own personal filter and background and experience and the way we were brought up. And all of that, of course, affects how our values were, developed. So, yeah.
I think sometimes too, and I appreciate what you said about your dad, but even like my dad, is I always felt like if I had to talk to him, I had to have all the details. Right. Like I couldn't talk to him about the Reds or the Bengals or sports because he never really watched sports a whole lot. But I say all of that in that sometimes that's our perception. And then one time I was in the car with him and I was just talking to him about his dad and then his dad's dad. And then like a really, really cool conversation came out. And I was like, oh my gosh, like I've helped my dad at this distance at bay for decades because I thought whatever I had to say had to be super relevant, accurate, profound, and almost sound strategic. Does that make sense? Versus just a random conversation. And I had to own that side of the street. And I'm sure I've done the same thing to Taylor. I mean, I know I have, and Courtney, 100%. I've probably done it.
Yeah. So what do we do with that? Right. Again, we can't know what we don't know.
You need a t-shirt that says that.
We can't know what we don't know. Yeah.
Yeah. And then Karen can help you. There you go.
There you
Karen
go.
can help you. Yeah.
Call
Know what
Karen.
you don't know. Call Karen. Yes.
On the back.
Call your manager.
Yeah.
I need to speak to your manager.
Just speak to your manager. Yeah, that's a good t-shirt too. That's a great t-shirt.
Yeah. So values. So many things to play around with here. Words like respect, such a big word. Too big. What I noticed early on is when this word would show up as a high value, it was more about how they wanted their value to be treated. So if we kind of got down underneath the word respect and ask, okay, what do you want to be respected? That's the value. Respect isn't really the value. It's what you want to be respected, how you want to be respected.
You're helping to, again, peel back that onion and figure out what really, because again, we just think we've always had it in our mind or whatever that this is our value. But when someone starts asking us that question, it's like, oh, yeah, well, maybe that's really it.
Yeah. Organizations love to put integrity on their wall. But what does that really mean? How do you walk that talk? And so it really isn't the integral part of the values work that I do is I do not define any of these words. And I was just recently challenged with one value word. And I'll bring this back to you guys here and see what your thoughts are. The value is love. And while I've been very careful not to define how you how you define, I'm not going to tell you just because I have this values assessment doesn't mean I'm the beholder of all of the definitions of these words.
Mm-hmm.
How you define them is a part of your story, right? But interestingly, the word love came up, that maybe there is a defined way, universal way, because there is a part of this word that it really is it's like there's not even a word to describe the word love, right? How do you define it? It's the core of everything.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know. What are your thoughts about that? As I play this back to you guys now, figuring this out.
I mean, it's an interesting question because, like I say, like I love ice cream and I love my wife, right? And hopefully I love them in different ways. And then I was watching that show, Jane Pauley, Good Morning Sunday, the one, The Sun.
Mm-hmm.
And there was a country singer that wrote a song. His dad was dying. And he was trying to go home to say goodbye to his dad. And he said, I said goodbye on an iPhone 8. That's where I said goodbye because I didn't make it.
Mm-hmm.
And he said, I wrote this song called Grief. And I was really listening to him. And he said, grief, all it is, it's love that simply lost something. And I was like, whoa.
Mm.
Like that was so beautiful. And sometimes, I don't know, sometimes I want to make things really super complicated, right?
Mm-hmm.
Maybe sometimes it's not as complicated, but
yeah, and I really feel like that's the word love. I mean, it's almost like it's as simple or complicated as you would want it to be, right?
Yeah.
And
again, anyone can define it for them how it means.
Right. And it is too. I hear what you're saying, Karen, too. Like it's like a very feeling value. Like you feel it. It's like when I think of it, it's like an affinity for something. Is that the right word? Like, is that the right word?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I mean, gosh, even like what you said, Scott, when you say I love ice cream versus I love my wife, like,
yeah.
Right. We use it just like we use respect, right?
yes.
Mm-hmm.
So back to why the work that you do is so important in helping people to dive deeper into that. It is to open up that for them. Like, what does that really mean?
Yeah.
And I mean, that can just really be, I'll use the word, right? Life changing for some people when they can check in with some of those things on that they never really thought or felt about before. The other reason I love this, and I've done the values work with Karen, so I'll speak to that in a second too. But when you talk about defining them, it's so true. We all, like, if you and I do both have the value of connection, but if you ask both of us, that might mean something pretty different. So what if you found, in your experience, that when you work with, clients about their values, how it might even make a difference for their family or for their team or for, what have you, when they are opening up and having those conversations about what their value is and what it means to them.
Yeah, especially when it comes to a relationship, right? Whether you're it's just the one-to-one relationship or a broader collective with, like you say, family, community, team. I think that's one of the things that's so powerful about this work is the availability to have that definition. And that's the conversation starter, I think. Because if, let's say, we were on a team, and this is my easiest example about how this can be some dissonance between us, how you define punctuality and how you might prefer punctuality and where it might sit for me very low. Now, it doesn't mean that it's not because I don't have respect for being on time. I just might define that maybe a little differently.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm going to get, I'm going to rub you the wrong way when I'm showing up 5 minutes late or with my sandwich in my mouth whenever I do show up, right?
You're always willing to share that.
It's okay. Yes, I offered you a bite. So I guess that's the piece there that's important is how do you define this? This is your word. What does it mean to you? And why is that important? Really, really important for us to now have a conversation around that. Because now we can level set the playing field. Now I can show up for you knowing that this is important to you. Doesn't have to be my value, but I have a conscious choice now how I want to show up for you without sacrificing myself. But if it's something that I would say this is absolutely not, you'll never get this from me, then that means we've got to find some common something there that will allow us to work together.
Yeah, what I heard in that is that whole thing around like, how can we meet people where they are? How can we meet each other where we are around so many things, but this is a perfect example of that.
Yeah, but we're not having that conversation well enough, right? In our organizations and in our families.
That's right.
I think if you're listening to, this is why you need a coach. Because if I haven't experienced this work, but if I was going to experience it, the first couple of questions you would ask me, I would give you the answer I thought you wanted to hear. But what I see both of you is you're just like, you're digging and you're digging.
We're excavating.
Yeah. But the beautiful part about that, and I'll go back to the word love, because I'm a big believer in this, is that we can't love anybody until we can learn how to love ourselves. Like we just can't. There's no capacity. Well, I'm just saying there's no capacity for it.
Right.
To be able to do that. But when it becomes not my dad's story or my mom's story or my company's story or my wife's story, my neighborhood story, and it becomes like all of it becomes my story, then like that's where really cool stuff happens inside of people. And I went to see a psychiatrist. Oh my gosh, I don't know, 40 years ago.
You're that old?
No.
Yeah, I didn't think so.
I'm 59. Yeah. So it probably wasn't 19. Let's say I was 25. And here's what he said. He goes, "Hey, look, here's the deal." He goes, "Scott," and back then it was like $120. So it was a lot. He goes, "I'll keep taking your $120 and you can keep lying to me. And I'll sit here and I'll take it every week." And start being honest. And then I never went back.
Yeah. When you started being honest, that we had a little blip in your.
Oh.
So you said that when you started being honest, you stopped going?
No, I never.
We missed it.
No, I just stopped going. I was just like, yeah, I heard
too painful to be honest. Too painful to be honest.
Yeah. I'm going to save $120.
It's more important to save the money. Right.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. I keep lying to myself.
Well, that's the difference, I think, from a coach too, is being able to hold that space. I'm not needing to go back into your childhood and ask how you got here. I just want to know, why is that important right now? And is that limiting you? Or do we need to do some kind of a recalibration here to get you really ultimately where you want to be?
Yeah.
And both of you said something really powerful too. And you said one of the questions you would ask is like, what is that costing you? So what is that value costing you? That's a pretty interesting question.
I love the cost benefit analysis that came from my business background.
Like, let me pull that.
Yeah, it makes sense in every. You can't not ask that question almost in every aspect, right?
Yeah.
What's the future cost of this?
Yeah, and going back to you doing this, values assessment with me, it was, and I'm a coach, right? But I'm a nerd with all of this stuff. But it's just really deep work, and it's such important work. And I do remember that coming up, and I can't remember which value it was around at the time, but I do remember that cost, right? What's that costing you? Because you could, again, most coaches are just have this extra sense, right? This intuition where we're like, yeah, like what's coming up for you around that value?
Something about that. Yeah.
Yeah. And so again, we're not walking around having conversations like this on a normal basis. Like, tell me about your values and,
right.
What's behind that. So to have someone hold that space for me, that I don't get very often either, where, you're asking me those deeper questions, was so helpful. And there was just such, like, I wasn't surprised necessarily by anything, but it, again, because it's not work we typically do on our own, it was still a aha moment, right? Like, oh yeah, it was just a great reminder of what my values are and how can I continue to, like you said, make decisions based on those values, like a heck yes or a heck no. And so
That would be
anyway,
a hell yeah.
I know.
Hell yeah. We can say that
Hell
here.
yes
Hell
or
yeah.
hell no.
Ain't no
Yeah,
such thing as a hell maybe.
that's right. And it's easy for us to say, but we know it. Like, we know the difference
Mhm.
between that feeling. And we also, all of us struggle with that as well. But it's like, when you know that, like, hell no or hell yes, so like keep going back to that because it
Yes.
is tied to our values.
Yeah. That's
Um,
the unapologetic effortlessness, authenticity. That's where that lives. Truth.
mhm. I
But
get
what
it.
you're saying is that we don't spend enough time reflecting
That's right.
and holding that space for that reflection and to be willing to go that deep. It is transformational work. And on the other side of that work, you now have your roadmap. You now have your guardrails. You now have the things that can keep you on that road.
Mhm.
And you're shifting your trajectory still based on these guiding principles that now you live by. And that
Mhm.
makes it so much easier.
So
That's the
much.
effortlessness.
Wendy, it's that learning circle
Yes.
Mhm.
that if you just do that every day, you
Mhm.
clean up every mess you have or every mess you make, and even maybe acknowledge the messes that people made, on you or to you.
Mhm.
And life just gets a little freer. Doesn't
Mhm.
have to be that complicated.
Hey,
So,
Scott, for those who have not heard that, real quick, because even around our values, I think that learning circle can be so helpful. So just
mhm.
tell us the points of what do we do going through the learning circle?
Yeah. So if you can imagine a circle and it's cut in half. So on the right side of the circle would be observe, reflect, and discuss. And normally what would happen is let's just say I was offended by somebody at work or somebody in my life. I would go home tonight and I would think about that. So I would observe and I
Uh-oh.
right. Does that make sense?
Wait,
Yeah, you cut
we
out
lost
again.
you.
You cut out again,
I
Scott. Oh,
did.
yes.
Observe.
So observe. You would go home tonight and
Yeah. Observe,
Mhm.
reflect, and discuss. And then you would go home and you would reflect and discuss that in your own noggin, which is not a healthy place to go.
Yeah, yeah. Mm-hmm.
And transformation happens when you go to the left side of the circle, which is discuss. And that's with somebody you trust. Right. This is what happened. Between the two of you, you can build some accountability, which is the second one, which is really around, hey, what should I do? What could I do?
Oh, he froze again. I thought he was just pausing.
And I get
Aw.
maybe I'll just do this.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
just like
right.
that.
Yeah.
You psych us out.
So
So
yeah, keep going. Thank you. I think this is helpful for tied to the values piece.
yeah, just that learning circle, in recovery, it's really about inventory, and when I can clean my own side of the street every day, so taking daily inventory and I can clean that up and I don't have to live with a backpack full of resentments and all
Mhm.
kinds of stuff in my back and because I'm going to think of it as a trash can. So all of us have a trash can in our life. And if it's heaping over, that's a problem because we're always going to have trash. Is if I clean that up every day, I'm still going to have trash in my trash can, but there's room for more trash. There's that
Mhm. Mhm.
just room for it. And then spiritually, if we can get our hearts and heads around that, then I think that's when humanity just shows up and, we get to see everyone's best.
Mhm. Yeah. What I love about that and what you shared too is, like, even going back to what Karen was sharing, like, again, giving yourself the opportunity to reflect on what, like, if to your example, Scott, right? If I've been offended, what value did that go against?
Exactly.
Because
What
again,
value was challenged here? Absolutely.
usually the case, right? And then after we've, had those healthy conversations with someone else, right? To say, okay, this is what happened. This is what's coming up for me. It is then making sure you're taking that action step. What's something that I can do differently or be differently in order for me to change our thoughts and our feelings? Because that's what's happening, right? When we're feeling offended, we've got all these, as I call them, little T truths, right? Thoughts going through our head about the situation. And it stirred up all these emotions. And what we forget is that we have a choice in that. So from a values perspective, it's like, okay, what value got challenged? And what little T truths did I have about that person with that value? And then what's another way to think about it? Right. So I like,
Yeah.
I feel like that comes full circle.
So that part that you guys were just, that discuss piece is so important. And I've just had my own aha in the last maybe 3 or 4 weeks that I've been bringing more into my coaching conversations. And what's interesting is that when we keep those little thoughts in our, when we're doing that, even if we are reflecting, good job. But if we're keeping them inside of us, then we're only looking at this through a more subjective lens.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas when you put that outside of you, if you record it, you write it down, you give it to someone else, now it can be objectified. And we need to be doing that. We need a balance of subjective and objective perspective. Because the more we hold on to it, then it's just going to ruminate. And that's where we become our little T truths that may not actually serve us. But if we put it outside of us and look at it, now we can discern fear. Now we can say, what about that? You never do a journal entry and then look back at it years later and you're like, who wrote that? That wasn't me. That couldn't have come from me. But in that moment, that was what was happening.
Mm-hmm.
So it is important to take it outside of that brain and put it somewhere so that you can really look at it differently. That's the space that this values work provides as well.
Yeah.
So
I think we lose I think when you do that, it loses a lot of power, like a ton of power.
Especially when we say it out loud, because when we hear ourselves, I mean, it's one thing to write it down, right? That's one.
Yeah.
When you say it loud, and sometimes when you hear yourself say it, you're like,
Mm-hmm.
Can I take that back?
right. Or that
Yeah.
makes no sense. Or
Did I mean that?
Right.
I was at an event and I asked people if they were impacted by certain issues, and I needed you to be brave, and I need you to raise your hand if you're impacted. So be brave. And so I rose my hand, and then everyone's hand went up. I'm like, do you feel that tingle? Like that nervous tingle? And what I believe, that's shame, like falling from us.
Mm-hmm.
It's like it falls away from us. And when we can take that power that it holds against us and get rid of it. Now, I'm going to say this to the listeners again, is like, you need a coach to help you with that, because I'm not your guy. I'm a good storyteller, but I don't have the assets that Karen and Wendy have to be able to like help you with that. But gosh, I just think the impact you can have on other people. Oh, big time. Yep.
Hey, Karen, as we wrap this up, I think it's important. I want to ask you just like part 2 questions, right? Like, number 1, what else do you want the listeners to know about your work as a coach? And how do you see, since we are talking about culture, right? How do you see your work as a coach impacting culture? Just in general or detailed, whatever you want to share.
Yeah. Excuse me. I definitely think that the work can be transformational to help us live our best lives individually. And I see how organizations struggle being in their healthiest. And again, leaning back into culture, right? So what's happening in the organization where their values are not aligned is likely because they are, you know, the culture issues that they're having are likely values related. So we've got mergers and acquisitions. We've got new leaders. There's lots of change management happening. All these different aspects in an organization are it's time for a values recalibration. It's time to really be able to figure out, how do you walk your talk? How do you want to measure how well you're walking your talk? So culturally, when you don't have values that folks can be guided with in the organization, they're going to bring their own culture. We've talked about this before. So how do you as an organization, how do you as the leaders of this organization establish what these core values are and ensure that everyone understands what they mean, how to demonstrate, and, you know, those competencies and behaviors that are aligned with that value? And how regularly are you measuring for that? The other piece is that some of us individually may not fit in with those values. And that's okay. We just need to figure out what makes it a hell yeah or a hell no for us. And the more we can be authentic, the more we can push into that and figure out, is this where I am aligned or not? People are constantly staying in organizations because of the paycheck, or because they fear leaving, or they don't want to change, and they're not aligned. And it's costing the organization, it's costing you. So what does it look like for you to really get real with yourself and understand what is out of alignment here? What values are being challenged here? So it goes both ways. Toxic culture is rampant. And there's a way to start with values.
Yeah, absolutely. Scott,
so I don't know did I answer both of your questions?
I think so. I think it's just, I just want to make sure that if there's anything else, as in your work as a coach that you want people to know about you or your work, you have the opportunity, and obviously we have a podcast together, so you can talk about it all the time. But
yeah, it's just,
yeah.
I have to support coaches, I have a certification. To support clients, we have the assessment. To support teams, we have the opportunity to overlay each other's values. As a consultant, I come in and support you with your value words to help you get them to be really clear. And so when you put them on your wall, you'll understand everyone will understand what walking their talk looks like.
Oh, I love that.
I can see all those certificates behind you too.
Yeah, there's like there's all
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Yeah. You want to see mine?
Yes.
Yeah. They're back there.
Oh yeah, they're golf. It's all golf.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
In my house that I just moved into, I have blank walls right now. Yes.
Yeah.
It's okay. You have all these same certificates. Yeah.
Well, it is.
Well, you both are amazing. And Karen, thank you so much for sharing about your very, very important work. And again, I've had the pleasure of getting to work with you and just, having you hold that space for me. And it was really so helpful. And so we would just invite, if we ask the question, right? Like we always like to ask the question, let's go inside. So what would you invite our listeners to do or to be or to, what have you when it comes to values work and anything else?
Just how willing are you to go inside and be curious about where that value came from? And is it really yours?
Yeah. It's great. Scott, anything else?
No, I would just encourage anybody, if they're considering maybe getting a coach and leaning into that, is and it might even take some journaling. So, what are you afraid of?
Mm-hmm. What
like
is it costing you again, like to not be willing to go deeper?
I can remember you remember Pete Kunk, Wendy, like the first time I listed values, and sadly they were pretty materialistic. And he was so kind, and basically he didn't say this, but you're a mess.
Yeah.
And over time we got to shed some of those. Yeah, we got to shed some of those. And he did that and you say this a lot, Wendy, like space and grace. So he gave me tons of space, tons of grace. And then at the end of the day, great leaders, and you guys do this every day, is at the end, people will have said and thought, I did that myself.
Yes.
And then they own it.
Yeah.
That's the difference in coaching, for
Yeah.
Yeah,
sure.
that's what it's all about.
Yeah.
So, well, it was great spending time with all of you as listeners as well. And we look forward to seeing you next time. See ya.